The United States. The Civil War finally came to an end. After 4 years of deadly combat and more than 700,000 deaths, the pro-slavery Southern states were defeated by the abolitionist North. General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox. Several months later, slavery was abolished. Nearly 4 million of the South's 9 million inhabitants were enslaved. And at last they were free of their chains. For plantation owners, this revolution was unbearable.
So shocked to their identity, because our identity was very much tied up in being masters to being a class of people who were masters to slaves, even if they had not themselves been slave owners.
Slave owners were, of course, terrified by the end of slavery. They were terrified economically that they would lose their very cheap labor force, but they were also terrified that African American people would start to demand the rights of citizenship.
In 1865, a handful of Confederate veterans of Scottish descent decided to create a secret society in the town of Pulaski, Tennessee.
It was originally designed to be a fraternal order. It was designed as a joke. It was literally designed for a bunch of guys to have a reason to hang out and drink beer and just like take care of each other.
If we were to ask why they created the Klan, they claimed always that it started as a fraternal drinking society.
They were young men, they were bored, they lived in a small town called Pulaski, Tennessee, and they decided to form a little secret society.
The veterans initially wanted to share stories of battle and the good old times for the slave-owning South. They gave their group a mysterious name, Ku Klux Klan.
We don't know why they chose the name Ku Klux Klan. People say it's because that's the sound a shotgun would make when it was cocked, Ku Klux, like that. The one that is most broadly accepted is meant to be named after the Greek word for circle, kuklos. And that makes a certain amount of sense when you realize that the people who founded the Klan were educated in Latin and Greek and did use Latin phrases in particular in some of their other writings. They were very invested in the fact that they were well educated.
They harked back to Greek mythology, Greek names. It was really, in many ways, like a very adolescent fantasy of a kind of medieval bunch of warriors.
They added the word clan, a common term in Scotland, to the Greek phrase kuklos, and started each word with a K. The Klan was born. Their first appearances in public in Pulaski were peaceful, but soon harassment and intimidation of former slaves became daily rituals.
The very first Klan group in Pulaski was essentially a group that kind of played pranks. They would dress up in very elaborate costumes, not the white sheets that we see today, and they would go around and try and scare people or play pranks. They often would try and frighten freed slaves who they thought were so superstitious that they would believe they were ghosts and so on.
Sometimes they change their voices during the attacks, so they'll make animal noises and hoots and things like that, but they'll also speak really high or really low, or one guy will speak high and the other guy will speak low, or they'll take on a fake German accent. They're somehow being playful with their violence. They're performing.
Rumors spread that the masked men were ghosts of Confederate soldiers killed in combat, and back for revenge. Fear spread among former slaves. Soon, brotherhoods began to emerge across the South, with names like the Knights of the White Rose, the White League, and the Red Shirts. They all used the same intimidation tactics. Klansmen would stake out territory in front of voting booths to keep black men from participating in elections. The South had to stay in white hands.
They became a kind of paramilitary organization, or more properly said, a bunch of little paramilitary organizations, which very quickly, in the course of a year or so, became the violent enforcers of what black people could do and could not do.
African Americans resisted, sometimes armed, but the murders and lynchings continued.
Whippings were very common, and that was a legacy of slavery. These men, and one thing you notice is that when these Ku Klux whip people, they know how to whip people. They know what kinds of tree branch to use to get whatever effect that they want. You have to remember that whipping can be deadly, particularly in this era when you don't have the antibiotics. You get an infection. A couple of weeks later, out of terrible agony, you die, from just the open wounds caused by these whippings.
It's very important to understand that in lynching an individual, their goal was to intimidate the whole mass. That is what terrorism is. And to a very large extent, they succeeded, because while slavery was abolished, the complete subordination of African Americans continued. Unable to vote, unable to get decent jobs, unable to have education, unable to have health care. It was a very successful campaign by a small terrorist organization.
The Klan and its so-called men of justice began to get a reputation. Groups sprung up across the South, and recruitment exploded. The Klan still needed a charismatic leader to lead the fight. For the role, they chose a military man, a hero to Southerners from the War of Secession, General Nathan Bedford Forrest.
They come together, they said, okay, who's going to be our leader? And they took a vote, and they all voted for who they thought should be a leader. Nathan Bedford Forrest got the most votes, and they come to him and they're like, hey, we started this thing, it's called the Ku Klux Klan, or the Ku Klux, and we made you our leader. Nathan Bedford Forrest didn't even realize that he was voted as he wasn't even in the KKK.
Nathan Bedford Forrest was a romantic figure. He was a celebrity. He was just kind of known as kind of like a man who's going to do what needs to be done, right? So he was he had that reputation, and he was happy to have his face put on it. He clearly indicated that he was the head of the Klan.
For a group as violent as the Klan, Forrest was an ideal leader. His reputation preceded him. A former slave trader, he had committed a number of war crimes during the war.
During the Civil War, Nathan Bedford Forrest presided over the massacre of 300 to 400 black men who were surrendering. They were actually Yankee troops. They were surrendering to Forrest's troops, but Forrest allowed his troops to run rampage and in fact encouraged them to and murder all of these people. I think that really tells you what the Klan was all about. Nathan Bedford Forrest was a slave trader, a war criminal, and the first leader of the National Klan at its most violent moment.
With Forrest in the lead, the Klansmen began to take more punitive action. The violence reached its peak in 1868. With the presidential elections approaching, dozens of courthouses, churches, and polling places went up in smoke. More than 1,000 murders were committed in 4 weeks. former slaves could not be allowed in any case to exercise their rights. Doing so would upset the system of white dominance. The victims were not chosen randomly.
The main thing that the first Klan was trying to accomplish was the deactivation, the politicide of African Americans within the South. So they particularly targeted African Americans who voted. They even more so targeted African Americans who held office. And in many cases, they didn't go to the African Americans who held office in order to say, you need to resign your office or we're going to be back. They went in and they killed them outright. Because they...
Good afternoon, this is Elder G again. Now you see, this is October 7, 2025. Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee. They're just like that today. These prejudiced white people in the South, over 90% all white churches, over 90% black churches. They got that same prejudice that they had back then. The hate for black and brown people. That's how come they had to do the Voting Rights Act. Because these no good Klansmen and 3%ers and Proud Boys and Patriot Front and Oath Keeper, they believe in that very same thing that you just saw. They believe in that in 2025. That black and brown people is inferior to them. No matter what black people do, or what black people say, or how black people change, these prejudiced white people is always gonna think that the way they do. They done had over almost 500 years, and they still doing the same thing that they were doing almost 500 years ago. They're just no good. You can't negotiate with a terrorist. You can't negotiate with somebody that hates you. God don't want us to negotiate this time. There is no negotiation in our freedom. The freedom to speak, the freedom of the press, the freedom of religion, the freedom to petition our government, the freedom for us to assemble. We are never going to give that freedom up for no reason. We'll be a fool to give up freedom. Just like those old prejudiced white people, even though they prejudiced and they're the most hateful, and God's going to put them straight in hell, they still sticking with their prejudice. But this time, God told us, don't let nobody put no shackles around our ankles, or put shackles on our wrist, or a collar around our neck with a chain on it. God tells us we ain't got to never let nobody demoralize us like that ever again. It's not going to happen. We're going to take the same posture that you took. Either you're going to give us liberty or you're going to give us death. Whichever one you choose. We know that you bleed just like us. You just as scared of us if you think that we are you. It ain't going to happen. God told us that we don't have to surrender. We don't have to give up and go to the left or move over or go to the left, or move over or go to the right. We don't have to retreat. God tell us to stand our ground, just like states tell you you can stand your ground. If someone come against your community, or come against your family, or come against your town or your city or your state, you got every right to fight them with everything you got. If you haven't broke the Constitution and you ain't breaking no laws, they don't have no right to come to you. If they come to you and you ain't did nothing wrong and broke no law, they become your enemy. And you have every right to stand up for the Constitution of the United States of America. The freedom to speak, the freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom to assemble, freedom to petition our government. Those things are guaranteed in the Constitution, and they guaranteed to God. And they said we can defend the Constitution and God's rights all the way to war. If somebody try to violate your rights and violate the Constitution, you got every right to put that rebellion down. Just make sure you let Jesus lead you and guide you in the way that he would have you go. And then you pledge your allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. One nation under God, indivisibly with liberty and justice for all. That means that you don't have to quit the fight for justice. You don't have to quit when you're fighting for righteousness. You don't have to quit when you're fighting for your freedom to speak, your freedom of religion, your freedom of the press, your freedom to assemble, and your freedom to petition your government. You can go all the way to war for those things. You can defend it all the way to war. Nobody is going to put me in chains. Nobody is going to violate my rights and expect me to sit there and let it happen. It's just not going to happen. Do it within the Constitution. Do it in the rights that guarantee you. And do it in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Thank you.